Okay guys, I gotta know, who's responsible for climate change? Well, according to Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon, it's you, because you're not voting with your dollars.
We have opportunities to make fuels with lower carbon in it, but people aren't willing to spend the money to do that.
Exxon has lower carbon fuels ready to go, but consumers are simply too cheap to pay for them. But you know, the real bad guys here are, you guessed it, activists.
Society as a whole hasn't been doing enough of it, and frankly, society, and I'd say the activists, the dominant voice in this discussion, have tried to exclude the industry that has the most capacity and the highest potential for helping with some of this technologies.
The oil companies want to save us, we just won't let them. As you can imagine, reactions to this were not great. As climate economist Gernot Wagner put it, it's like a drug lord blaming everyone but himself for drug problems. But in all fairness, the logic used by Woods makes sense, at least according to the rationality of the free market, which liberates corporations from government oversight, facilitates innovations, and enables consumer freedom. By this reasoning, it's up to us to consume our way to a better world, flush with electric cars, solar panels, and eco-friendly sandals. Under this paradigm, a corporation's sole imperative is to generate profits for shareholders, which is why Woods is especially critical of Exxon's activist investors, who have proposed that the company aggressively cut back on fossil fuel production.
Activists that hijack that process, a legitimate process, and frankly abuse it to advance an ideology that's inconsistent with the well-being of the company.
Now, it's frustrating, of course, to hear the CEO of a behemoth fossil fuel company imply that the slow response to climate change is our fault. You know, especially when we know that according to some estimates, 57 companies are linked to 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions since 2016. But getting gaslit by an oil mogul isn't just annoying. When Woods shifts blame onto consumers, he distracts from the real forces behind climate change. Meanwhile, his framing suggests that mitigating its effects could be a hopeless pursuit, especially when solutions are framed around consumption and profit rather than, reorganizing society to prioritize humanity over fossil fuel consumption. It can feel a bit like, to paraphrase the famous quote by Frederick Jameson, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of climate change under capitalism. And real quick note to say, that there's not going to be time for us to convince you that climate change is real today. You can check out the recent IPCC report for that. If you think it's not real, just watch this video as a fun exercise. I guess to yourself throughout it, just go, oh really? To everything I say. Instead, today, we're going to examine why things feel so hopeless and consider some solutions offered by recent theorists, including a philosopher who thinks that the best thing that you can do to save the planet is work less and spend more time hiking, cooking, maybe playing guitar with your friends. So let's see if it might just be possible to imagine the end of capitalism without the end of the world. As Florence in the Machine note, it's always darkest before the dawn. So before we tell you how things are gonna get better, let's start by figuring out how things have gotten so bad. Now, when we listen to CEOs and politicians explain climate change to us, it can feel like everyone is the hot dog guy from that I Think You Should Leave sketch.
We're all trying to find the guy who did this and give him a spanking.
And even worse, it feels like the guys who drove the hot dog cart through our window are now the ones trying to offer us exciting new solutions to fix that very window. Now, we discussed this in a recent video, but both the fossil fuel industry and climate change deniers have used all the tools of propaganda to control cultural and media narratives. And that's how we end up in a situation where the media treats these guys like normal business dudes.
Have an energy system today that has the mix that it has, and you can't change this overnight.
And this person, like a radical outlier.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
CEOs are rational agents, motivated by the principles of market economics. Thunberg is irrational for claiming that humanity should be prioritized over profit. But even if media narratives fall in one direction, don't we still have some agency in what and who we vote for? Americans are more concerned than ever about the climate catastrophe, but we still tend to vote on more urgent issues, like the economy or healthcare. When your rent is soaring and your wages are tumbling, it's hard to worry too much about melting glaciers in Greenland. And as this current US presidential campaign cycle heats up faster than the North Atlantic, we've barely heard any discussion of climate policy. Actually, we've barely heard discussion of anything because one guy yells and the other guy mumbles and it's hard to really make anything out of it. Even supposedly progressive politicians know all of this and act accordingly. Like when liberal hero Dianne Feinstein scolded a bunch of child activists for asking her to help with climate change. Which is why it can feel like the only recourse we have is our own consumption habits. But guys, let me tell you a secret. Here in Los Angeles, I see so many hybrid cars and electric cars and reusable water bottles with cool stickers on them and eco-friendly tote bags, and yet every summer is the hottest summer ever. So if the media is a propaganda tool and consumer choices aren't moving the needle and politicians are more or less just dropping a double-decker on the planet before they die, well then maybe it's time for some bolder actions. But when climate activists spray paint Stonehenge or interrupt a golf tournament, they're largely just seen as troublemakers. And in the case of the recent golf tournament, spectators started chanting, USA, USA, as police arrested the activist, which I guess implies that the opposite of climate action is the USA. Now, all of this seems like it leads to one of two things. Either we're so dejected by all this that we end up feeling both hopeless and helpless and just lie in bed consuming content until we die, or it can push us towards more drastic action, like those outlined by scholar Andreas Malm in his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. If you don't really like reading books, it actually got turned into a Hollywood picture that you could watch. Now, in one of our recent videos, we argued that neoliberalism is so ideologically ingrained into our culture that's basically a sort of religion. And in the churches of neoliberalism, free markets, limited government intervention, and individual choice are like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Wealthy fossil fuel companies face little regulation and are often aided by government subsidies. Operating under cold, hard market logic, they effectively offload moral responsibility onto consumers. Like how Exxon got government subsidies to develop energy-efficient alternatives for the future while they just continue to pump out fossil fuels. And just like all the fossil fuels in our soil, this shit runs pretty deep. There's tons of overlap between the fossil fuel industry and our political system. Take notable American sniper and former vice president Dick Cheney. He was the CEO of Halliburton, which is an oil service company, before he served our nation by becoming George W. Bush's co-pilot. And fossil fuel lobbyists work to influence policy at basically every level of the government. At the time of filming this video, $35,141,294 has been spent on oil lobbying this year, with yearly averages normally landing closer to $125 million. They also fund studies and scientific research, which encourage scientists to greenwash their destruction of the planet.
Aggressively fight against some of the science. Yes.
This includes companies like BP forming intimate relations with universities like Princeton, donating at least $700 million over 10 years. But unlike most intimate relations, we're the people getting screwed. And they pay prominent media sources to create paid content extolling the virtues of the fossil fuel industry. And that's why I wanted to stop and tell you really quick about the new Chevron Cares program that we're sponsored by. Chevron wants to let all of you know that's not a real thing. According to a report by Drilled, even the most trusted news outlets run internal brand studios that create content for major companies, including the fossil fuel industry. Often virtually indistinguishable from hard news, this content packages corporate narratives to look like objective media. Now, one particularly wild example is Reuters hosting summits for the fossil fuel industry, which aims to remove the pain points holding back faster production of oil and gas. That's to say nothing of the massive advertising and marketing budgets they spend convincing you that we really need that oil. Okay, so check out this commercial, which straight up says that if we didn't have oil, you wouldn't be able to go to the hospital, and you and your unborn baby would probably die.
Without oil and gas, hospitals wouldn't have what they need to keep us healthy, heal wounds, save lives, and deliver little bundles of joy.
Or check out this one, which I swear to God tries to convince you that if the oil industry didn't exist, you would never get to again.
That connection was brought to you by petroleum products.
So is there anything left for us to do other than hope that we can get jobs writing funny commercials for oil companies? I'm gonna tell you after the break, but I wanted to take a second to shout out our friends over at Yellow Dot Studios who are helping us make this video today. Now, if you haven't heard of Yellow Dot, they are a media company founded by Adam McKay, the guy who probably made some of your favorite movies of all time.
We're men, okay? That means a few things. We go on riverboat gambling trips. We make our own beef jerky. That's what we do.
Now, what they do is use comedy and media to spread awareness on the reality of climate change.
Hey, everybody. You know your house? Your house is about to be part of the ocean.
And they made some very funny and good stuff featuring people you like a lot that you can definitely check out. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you to head over to Yellow Dot's channel for part 2, where I'm going to sit down with their director, Stacey Roberts Steele, and we're going to have a chat about how we can fight back against the fossil fuel ghouls, and we're going to learn more about the work that Yellow Dot is doing. So be sure to stick around for that. Once you get over there, be sure to subscribe to Yellow Dot's page so you can keep up with what they're doing. Okay, so let's get back to feeling pretty bad about the future of the planet. Now, it might seem like the fossil fuel industry and capitalism are like the Ben and J-Lo of corporate political power. But the good news is that Ben and J-Lo are getting divorced, and some contemporary philosophers and academics are arguing that there are viable alternatives to this increasingly hot shit show. I guess increasingly hot shit show can refer either to the boiling of the planet or Ben and J-Lo having incredibly hot breakup sex. These alternatives go way beyond simply taxing corporations more or subsidizing electric vehicles. Now, one option, which is proposed by economic geographer Brett Christophers in his new book, is removing the renewables market from the private sector and then making it a state-funded enterprise. As he writes in a recent essay for Time, Western governments' renewable subsidies rarely occasion strong profits. More commonly, they allow just about sufficient profit to keep the sector afloat. He cites Warren Buffett, who admitted that his firm Berkshire Hathaway only built wind farms for the tax credit. Christophers points out that there isn't a huge moral component to the structure of the fossil fuel industry. It simply follows the logic of capital. As he writes, the likes of Exxon and Chevron continue predominantly to drill for hydrocarbons instead of investing in renewables, not because they and their executives especially love oil, but because they love money. Because these guys, like, if the brains of babies made cars go, they would start an orphanage and you'd never see the kids again. But rather than radically overthrowing capitalism, Christophers proposes taking renewable energies out of the market and then making them public goods. In doing so, the value of these energies wouldn't hinge on stock value, but on protecting the future of humanity. And as Christophers sees it, only the state has the necessary financial and administrative capacity to increase global investment in solar and wind energy at the pace needed. So while we don't need to undo capitalism as such, we got to take renewable energies out of the capitalist market. Now, at this point, I bet some of you are thinking, oh yeah, so the same government, which seems like they can't even tie their own shoes, they're going to somehow fund and develop renewable energy at a rapid clip. Sure, boss, sure. Others of you might be thinking that this solution doesn't push against the dominance of the market enough. And some of you might still be thinking about that extra hot Ben and J-Lo divorce sex. And to you, I salute you. Okay, so let's consider another large-scale and controversial approach to fighting against climate change and the economic structures that enable it. It's called degrowth, which economic anthropologist Jason Hickel defines as a planned reduction of energy and resource use designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. While not a new concept, degrowth's most contemporary advocate is Japanese philosopher Kohei Saito, author of Slow Down, the Degrowth Manifesto. Utilizing some lesser-known works of Karl Marx, Saito argues for a new type of degrowth communism, in which everything from production to labor hours slow down to reverse the effects of climate change. Jordan Peterson, you better not be watching right now because this is all going to make you real mad. For Saito, the political solutions to climate change offered by the Green New Deal, along with individual practices like driving electric cars and using paper straws, are little more than the new opiates of the masses. He writes, what kinds of measures are you taking personally to prevent global warming? Have you bought a reusable shopping bag to reduce your reliance on disposable plastic ones? Do you carry a thermos so you don't end up buying drinks in plastic bottles? Did you buy an electric car? Let me make one thing clear from the start. These good deeds are meaningless in the end. They can even cause more harm than good. He argues that these policies and practices function like Catholic indulgences, allowing us to escape the pangs of our conscience about consumerism and look away from the real imminent danger around us, which in turn allows the forces of capital to swaddle our concerns in environmental impact statements and tuck them away beneath the form of deception known as greenwashing. This is because these forms of resistance are all completely compatible with the same economic system that benefits from the fossil fuel industry. A system that Saito argues enables us to enjoy the imperial mode of living, which is how he describes the way in which the consumption-focused lifestyles of those in the global north is dependent on the economic and ecological exploitation of those in the global south. His lifestyle is predicated on infinite growth that comes at a very real cost. This leads Saito to infuse his plan for degrowth with a Marxist analysis of class antagonisms and social relations. But unlike those, who might be scared of Marx or associate his work with Soviet-style communism and state-led deprivation, Saito argues for a communism of abundance. As he reads Marx, when he talks about abundance, he doesn't mean having lots of stuff, but what he does mean is creating the conditions for everyone to have a good life. You know, stuff like medical care, transportation, housing, food, water, all these things guaranteed and free. Saito opposes this to market environmentalism, which promises an end to climate change that will still boost the economy. Now, like Christopher's, Saito thinks that it's pretty absurd to expect the profit-centered logic of the market to really prioritize a shift to renewable energy. And they both think that there's no way to just capitalism our way out of climate change. And for Saito, this means that we don't just need to slow down our industrial production, but also the production and consumption of media, especially those which perpetuate our culture of consumption. So sorry, Kardashians, you're not getting renewed once Dr. Saito takes over as the czar of all media. Now, as he writes, production focusing on status symbols and luxury goods, on advertising and branding while ignoring use value spells death in an age of climate crisis. There are so many vital issues to be addressed. Guaranteeing universal access to food, water, electricity, shelter, and transportation, combating rising tide and flooding, protecting ecology, and so on. We must prioritize the production of things necessary to respond to the crisis, not things whose worth resides only in their capacity to produce value. I mean, one upside to all this is less ads for stuff that you don't need on YouTube. Also, none of those tech review channels and things like that. A lot less influencers. I don't know, it sounds pretty good. Now, Christopher's and Saito might inspire some hope, but they both do involve a pretty radical shift away from our current system. We might be able to imagine a world in which Christopher's policy suggestions are taken on by some Western governments, and renewable energy is able to take off as a publicly owned industry. However, we might worry that even if a few major nations made those shifts, it might not really be enough. And it could be even harder to imagine Saito's degrowth communism in action, as the C word often makes folks imagine a violent revolution led by angry men with beards. But for those of us not quite ready to do a revolution, Saito makes clear that what he envisions is not a reboot of the Russian Revolution, which he doesn't think would magically just change the economic system. Instead, what he advocates for is something more gradual, writing, "What's more realistic is Rosa Luxemburg's idea of revolutionary realpolitik through reform, taxing the rich to introduce a maximum income, for example. Reforms and policies can bring a lot of changes in our daily perception and behavior, even though it doesn't overcome capitalism immediately. But changing our consciousness and behavior in daily life creates more room for demanding more radical changes." He also suggests thinking about degrowth on a more local scale. And a lot of his favorite examples are things that involve actions that are communal rather than individual. He cites communities in Detroit that took advantage of falling land values to turn large swaths of the city into urban farms, and a policy put into action in Copenhagen to plant fruit trees all over the city to start making food freely available. And he notes that policies like this can then have downstream effects, because you probably don't want your apple to taste like engine exhaust, so then you might want to expand the already robust bicycle lanes in Copenhagen. Saito's ideas for how we can meaningfully make change run the gamut from starting workers' co-ops to organizing school strikes, from volunteering for environmental NGOs to running for local office. All pretty doable things. If you've done one of these things, let us know in the comments. If you want to do one of these things, tell us and let us support you. And he thinks these actions can create lifestyles less centered on production and consumption and more focused on letting us just be humans. You know, the upside of less shopping is more time to hang out and figure out what you're into. And maybe the best part of this idea is that he imagines a world where we have to work less. Saito argues that one of the biggest contributions to degrowth can take place in reforming our workplaces through labor unions, demanding our employers institute environmentally friendly policies, and advocating for, here it is folks, shorter work weeks. He writes that right now we work 5 days a week and often more than 40 hours. We could immediately reduce that to 4 days. And with technologies, I think we could go down to 3 in the future. So that's a 25-hour work week. What will we do with all this new time? We will spend more time with family. We will garden. We might do sports. We will do some volunteering and have some political engagement in the planning of what we produce and what our local government will do. We will commute not by car, but by bus and tram. And our workplace will be more horizontal. We should have more job rotation. It should not always be the same person doing the best part of the job and then some people cleaning their clothes. With new technologies, we can share more and rotate jobs. Let me know what you would do with more time. Imagine that 25-hour work week. What else are you doing? I'm probably watching a lot more movies, hopefully reading more, playing music a lot, and probably making more elaborate recipes. Like I'm probably cooking lunch every day. Well, maybe not as easy as drinking a smoothie with a paper straw. These examples show that it's not some absolute either or between large-scale political solutions and just some ineffective small actions or opiates. Now, this doesn't mean that, if we all get to work this weekend, we're going to reverse climate change, but it does mean the next time an oil CEO looks you in the eye and says climate change is your fault, you can throw a book at him and tell him to read up. Maybe also to suck your dick. Okay, so you might be thinking, this is the part of the video where I'm going to tell you to do something, but it's not really what we do. But this is in the wheelhouse of our friends over at Yellow Dot. So go over to their channel right now and watch part 2 of this video, which is my interview with Yellow Dot's director, Stacey Roberts Steele. There's a link here and a link in the description. Click either one. And once you're there, be sure to subscribe to their channel and leave a comment letting them know that we sent you. And if you're still here for some reason, thank you so much. A huge shout out to our patrons for all your support. If you want to support our channel, we have a Patreon. There's a link in the description. You get videos early without ads. You get extra audio and video content, things of that nature. You get on our Discord server, lots of good stuff. Thanks in general for just hanging out and being here. If you are still here, why don't you ring the bell? Like this video, subscribe to the channel. But in general, I just really hope that one day we all work a whole lot less. And in the meantime, I don't know, take it easy. Slow down a little bit. Stop consuming so much. Take a walk, drink some water, take a nap. You deserve it. I'll see you next time.